Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. One of the questions that I get a lot, especially come the political season, is why is it that you got so many black people who act against their own interests and can't even tell you why that is? And this is a malady that affects us all the time, not just every 2 years. You got a lot of black folks, a majority of us in fact, whose behavior is downright contradictory. It flies in the face of reality, and a lot of people constantly ask why that is. Well, I'd like to offer at least one explanation. They say that insanity is doing the same thing over and over, hoping for different results. Well, there's an adjacent to that. Doing absolutely nothing and hoping for a big change regardless simply because you need it. People who, when facing a terrible situation, try to tell themselves that the most ridiculous outcome is actually within the realm of possibility. This is called wishful thinking. Now, when children play make-believe, it can be cute, but when adults decide that the most crucial threats facing them can be solved by make-believe, that's when it becomes dangerous. And wishful thinking is even worse than make-believe because at least make-believe requires you to come up with some sort of story. Wishful thinking doesn't even require that much, which I guess explains why so many people rely on it. Wishful thinking is what causes black people who have seen Joe Biden spend 50 years doing nothing but attacking black people turn around and say, I'll vote for him because he knows what'll happen if he gets on black folks' bad side again. Now, when an adult makes a decision, particularly one that has to do with a crisis, it's supposed to be based on something. Now, before I go any farther, no, this is not going to be a strictly political rant, not entirely. What I want to deal with is why so many black people fall prey to this kind of suicidal denial of reality. I think we all know at least a few people who never seem to be able to get their act together, and a large part of their dysfunction comes down to the fact that they engage in way too much wishful thinking. In fact, any amount of wishful thinking is bad. Now, as outside observers, whenever we see people behaving like this, it looks totally insane to us. And it may not make complete sense to the person doing it, but they've convinced themselves that there's something otherwise reasonable about it. But my question to you is, have you perhaps been engaging in a little bit of wishful thinking of your own? Black people have taken wishful thinking to be a virtue. And this penchant for expecting some amazing change in our circumstances to happen without us doing anything to bring it about, it becomes most clear when we examine the relationship between black people and the church. Now, let's be clear on one thing. Religion didn't lead us to wishful thinking. It was our wishful thinking that led us to overemphasize religion. And this particular dysfunction comes straight out of the cotton fields. It's because religion was one of the very few things we were allowed to do. Of course, part of the miseducation of the Negro was to teach us that we deserved to be enslaved and that these white supremacists who enslaved us hadn't done anything wrong. Why, it was God's will. Well, that is, until it wasn't. And because we have been the most oppressed people in all of human history, because we've been locked out of so many opportunities for so long, wishful thinking is all we've had. We're human beings, and human beings are creatures of habit. That's important because, as David Milch once said, we do not think our way to proper action. We act our way to proper thinking. But of course, what goes unsaid is that the opposite is also true. People can have dysfunctional behavior and dysfunctional thinking foisted on them if someone else controls their environment. You can derange the internal politics of a target population if you can starve them for resources, make it where resources come almost entirely from their oppressors, and make certain that you selectively elevate a small handful of them. That way, a certain unscrupulous number of the oppressed will understand that joining in with the oppressors is the fastest way to get some quickie benefits for themselves. When people have been reduced to nothing more than helpless bystanders in their own lives, it's only natural that after a while they'll begin hoping for some miracle to fall out of the sky to free them, because that's the only place they can imagine it coming from. It's not as if they have the resources to change their circumstances for themselves, and they don't have any allies who will act on their behalf either. Wishful thinking usually sprouts from one of two mindsets, either because you can't do anything about your circumstance, or you can't be bothered to do anything about it. And truth be told, 90% of the time, the latter reason is why people engage in wishful thinking. Wishful thinking leaves you totally exposed to two great dangers. The first, of course, is that whatever it is you're hoping to wish away won't cease to exist. You will. And the second danger, which is just as great as the first, is that you make yourself prey to any two-bit con man who comes along and makes you think he can make your wishful thinking come true. Any half-baked shyster who comes along and either pretends to go along with your wishful thinking or tells you things that seem to undergird it, why, they'll have you eating right out of their hand. And that last one is why we have so many pulpit pimps in our community and nowhere near as many real leaders. A lot of us have taken to using things like religion as a shield to hide behind, so we don't have to face our problems. And there's no shortage of shady individuals who will gladly tell you to do just that, so long as they're getting paid to do so. I know that there's many among you who might think that I'm taking aim at your church or your spirituality, but I'm not. Religion can be a good thing when it gives us conviction to stand on principles that empower us, and when it inspires us to have courage and to reach for something higher than ourselves. But it becomes a problem when God will help us turns into God will do everything for us. What's the difference? Help is when God gives you assistance to supplement the work and effort that you have put in. If you see some white supremacist having set fire to your neighbor's home and now he's running over to yours, you don't just sit back and wait for God to strike him down with a bolt of lightning, or for the arsonist to have a fatal heart attack, or hope that the arsonist winds up accidentally setting himself on fire instead. You see someone with a can of kerosene and some matches running up to your home, you're going to do something. And if the house is already on fire, you're not going to hope for a sudden torrential rainstorm to put out the flames. It's much more likely you'll be fighting hard as hell to preserve your home. But all too often, especially with these old Negroes and the ones who try to hide behind pious-sounding rhetoric, they would just sit back and see how things play out. It's sad but true, people have a predisposition to believe whatever doesn't require them to make any changes to what they're doing. And of course, religion isn't the only example. Politics, sports, other things that black folks don't handle so well, those are also other examples. But our liberation movements in particular, especially the civil rights movement, is a grand example of this. The reason black people like chanting and marching is because it doesn't cost us anything to do these things. Well, white power likes it too, because marching and chanting won't cost them anything either. Don't get me wrong, faith has its place, so does hope. But you better understand that hope is only a single rung above desperation. And as for faith, more often than not, faith usually means you're giving someone else far more credit than they deserve. Hope is what people do when their situation is completely out of their hands. They don't know what the heck's going to happen. They have no option, no play, and no assistance, and they're needing something good to happen, but they don't completely believe that it will. You need something better than that. Faith is supposed to be a supplement to your actions, not a substitute for action. Faith has its place, but it's far better to know. Knowledge is when reality and your actions occupy the same space. You know what the situation is, and you've prepared for it. You have answers to the dilemmas and problems that you face. When you substitute wishful thinking for reality, you take a horrible outcome from being a strong possibility to an absolute inevitability. When faced with a bad situation, that's not the time for cope or pie in the sky. That's the time to knuckle down, or if need be, knuckle up and put in the work. Because once you abandon wishful thinking and begin engaging in strategic thinking, you'll find that you've got what it takes to face down your problems, and you won't waste any more time trying to face away from them. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Andrew Murphy, Gordon Gates, Nyan Pharmacy, Jeffrey Williams, and Gregory Franklin. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.